Hey everyone, welcome back to the program. I wanted to touch on some of the tariff news that's been happening. The tariff regime the Trump administration attempted to put into place last week on Wednesday, Liberation Day. I want to start off by saying I'm not an economist or a financial expert, but I just wanted to really offer my thoughts on the alleged onshoring component that's partially motivating the Trump administration in implementing these tariffs. So, as you know, over the past few months, tariffs have been, the talk of the town in D.C. They're on again, off again. There's a lot of uncertainty there's a lot of uncertainty in the markets because of the sort of sporadic nature of much of the conversation surrounding tariffs. The only consistent posture it seems to be is relative to China, for obvious reasons. But last week, Trump unloaded a massive amount of tariffs on around 90 countries. Now, across the board, many of you probably already know all these things, but just to kind of lay the groundwork here, there is a 10% tariff across the board for all of these countries, excluding Mexico and Canada. They already have a 25% tariff applied on goods, particularly in their auto industry. And also, there weren't additional tariffs applied partially because of the agreement that we have, the trade agreement we have between us and Mexico and Canada. Then there were reciprocal tariffs that were applied as well, and they were calculated using kind of a wonky formula, but they were calculated by dividing the trade deficit for the U.S. in goods with a particular country and the total goods imported from that country and dividing that number by 2. So that's why there were some of these numbers that you had for these reciprocal tariffs were massive, and most economists didn't really understand, where the Trump administration derived these numbers from. So the markets, they went crazy, and ultimately bonds began to fall. They were being dumped, and thereby increasing the yields or interest on the bonds. And that was promising an eventual increase in prices and interest rates. And that's something that the Trump administration didn't foresee. I think he understood that the stock market would basically suffer for a while, but he didn't understand that this would also affect the bond market, which is something that Scott Bessent wasn't prepared for, according to some analysts. So Trump rescinded the reciprocal tariffs this week for countries that are said to be in the process of negotiating better trade agreements with the U.S. Apparently, he gave a speech and he said that a lot of these countries came back and they're kissing his ass now. I don't really believe that, right? And I don't think we have a list of countries that are actually that are actually in the process of negotiating with the Trump administration right now. But maybe that'll come out later. So this was basically a retreat by the administration because of a fallout on Wall Street. But there are many supporters right now, and I think they make a decent case, not one that I would particularly subscribe to completely, but they're making the case that they believe this was a way for Trump to box out China. He's playing 4D chess, and this was the plan all along, is what many of them will say. And that Trump was ultimately wanting to know which nations would retaliate. China retaliated. The EU was about to retaliate prior to the order of the reciprocal tariffs being rescinded. Now, ultimately, this will allow these nations to choose between continuing trade with China and face consequences or bend to Trump's will. And so that's why I said there's a part of that theory that, this was planned all along that makes sense. I don't, again, completely subscribe to that, but the idea that, you have all these countries right now that are negotiating with Trump. Trump is very likely saying because, if we take a few steps back, Trump applies these massive tariffs on China on top of what they already had, bringing their tariffs like 65%. China retaliates. I think and you can look these numbers up to be more accurate. I have them written down here. I think they retaliated with an 84% tariff, and Trump jumped it to like 140. So they're in the hundreds right now. Like I think China's tariff against us is like 125, and I think ours against them is like 140. So it's just crazy numbers right now. And I think that basically what we're going to see happening with many of these negotiations that Trump is allegedly having with other countries is that he's probably saying to them, look, number one, you're not going to go in the back door and deal with China, right? If you do, these tariffs are going to stay here. The reciprocal tariffs are going to say, hey, we're not even going to talk to you. And I think that's probably the way that he's looking to isolate China, probably. But I think a lot of this capitulation just had to do with what the markets were doing, specifically the bond markets. And the truth is that China will likely always, and many people are saying, China can't they can't sustain themselves without American markets. Maybe there's some part of that that's true, but China can consume its own goods. They can trade with other countries. They can go through third countries. There are many ways and they can reinvest the money that they were, purchasing our debt with, basically, to reinvest in their own country. We're not the only country that consumes goods and stuff. So we'll see if that plan works. But ultimately, I have to say, I don't disagree with the idea of using tariffs to bring in revenues, to reshore, as a negotiating tool, or even a mechanism pursuant of a certain foreign policy agenda. But I think you'll find that most economists and financial experts were particularly worried about just the hurried, sloppy way that this was rolled out, and obviously the scale as well. I think that if reshoring is one of the components driving the Trump administration to pursue these initiatives, they need to be more patient and have a more calibrated approach. And of course, that takes, that's timing, right? Trade deals take a long time to negotiate. And the truth is, especially when you're dealing with multiple countries and all of the different mechanisms that drive, their trade domestically. And I know, and we know, and I've said in several videos, Trump just doesn't have this time, right? Unfortunately, he doesn't have the time, and that's why he's working at breakneck speed to get this thing implemented. So maybe, that's kind of what I'm positing. Maybe it's not about these more, heavy initiatives like reshoring and stuff. Maybe it's partially about that, but it's probably more about getting us better deals and trade with different countries. Maybe it's just as simple as that. And that would be a great PR victory. The reshoring aspect has been intriguing to me. Obviously, Made in America certainly has plenty of economic benefits for our country, for our citizens, for our workers. We really don't produce anything outside of financial services and military hardware. So it would be nice to see manufacturing come back. I don't think I was alive when I was born in a time when, manufacturing was leaving our country. And so it would be interesting to see, workers actually, maybe not working in services and in retail as much, and, going back to factories. And those local economies being lifted up. So seeing the rebirth again of an actual manufacturing base would be amazing in my mind. But I think that many people are kind of over simplifying that, and they're putting too much hope. They may think it's going to be something like a walk in the park, but it's not going to be. And this made me look deeper into what reshoring would actually take. I just did a little bit of research. It's not, anyone can do it. I just wanted to kind of lay it out here in my opinions on the tariffs. And I realize this may not actually be on the top of the agenda for the Trump administration because of the sheer size, and again, the scale of a project like that. Depending on what industry we're talking about as well, that would have a lot to do with what the outcomes would be. And the results wouldn't probably be readily evident, and they would probably be uneven and protracted in some cases. So after all, with all the uncertainty with Trump that Trump's team has introduced into our economy, would investors want to, take a risk in reshoring and, recalibrating supply chains? Probably not. They'll probably just wait out Trump's presidency. Pretty simple stuff. So I saw yesterday a lot of complaining, and this is kind of what made me want to do a little video on this, but I saw a lot of complaining from the right wing because of some AI generated videos and photos that the Chinese produced. One in particular was it was Trump, J.D. Vance, and Elon Musk working in a Nike factory, right, on an assembly line in these matching gray uniforms. And the other one was these fat Americans that were basically so one of them was eating a cheeseburger and they were sitting down at a sewing machine, and another one was asleep at a sewing machine, and they're all making shoes and stuff like that. So they're just basically, mocking us and saying, this is what it would look like if you guys worked on an assembly line and this kind of thing. And heads were exploding. I saw it on Breitbart. And, Breitbart is like, they're all about the CCP, getting rid of the CCP and, the Chinese Communist Party. They're all about that. You know what I mean? Red China. China is our biggest threat, all of these different things. And in many ways, they probably are. But I'm just saying it was just hilarious reading some of the comments because people were pissed about that. I thought it was funny. And I thought there was some reality to it because that's probably the way it would look if we ever brought back assembly lines to this country. So a lot of accuracy there. And it's part of the issue that we'll be describing in this short piece. We have a skilled labor issue in our country and likely a deficient workforce readily available to take on manufacturing. It's been years since we've been in the manufacturing industry and on a large scale, right? I mean, I don't think we obviously don't have the same workforce and people with skill sets as we did after World War II. So if reshoring is truly part of the goal the administration is pursuing, how will you convince young Americans to pursue trade schools to develop the necessary skills and go work in a factory instead of pursuing a degree where they can go work in a comfy office doing accounts payable or something like that? And how will you create the interest? How long would an endeavor like that take? Again, building the facilities. We'll get into all those things, but the reshoring itself and then getting the workforce together, right? And how many of these people, and I'll get into that a little bit later, but how many of these people on the assembly line are going to be immigrants? Probably a lot of them. That's why the immigration problem is never going away. I might talk a lot about immigration on this show, but it's a problem that I already know it's not going to change. There are too many interests on both the right and the left wing for us to ever have a truly nativist immigration policy. So this is from Barron's, and I'm just going to touch on this article. It's not too long, but it's important. So as the global trade war escalates, many companies are taking a hard look at bringing manufacturing to the U.S. Onshoring can yield benefits for the overall economy. Manufacturing locally creates jobs and makes supply chains less risky. Shorter shipping routes have environmental advantages. That is a key, and that's why I admire the idea of us wanting to reshore. It creates local jobs. It makes supply chains less risky, thereby helping our national security situation. Because if we have this high-tech military industry where we produce weapons on our soil, one of the very few things that we produce here, and it's contingent on rare earths from China, which Trump is trying to change, that's a problem, right? If you're getting your resources from these volatile countries, right? Like even Congo, where Trump is trying to forge a minerals deal with the Congolese, that's not the best. It's not the best situation, right? That puts our national security at risk, obviously. So, however, the process of onshoring production is far more complex and time-consuming than policymakers and the public may realize. Companies moving manufacturing to the U.S. will likely face a long and bumpy road, one that can involve supply chain disruptions and higher inflation. As companies weigh the risks and benefits, they will want to consider 4 hard truths that make onshoring a challenge. So the first is the timing. So the process of shifting manufacturing in the U.S. takes 3 to 10 years in most cases. This is much longer than the assembly plants of yesteryear. Modern advanced manufacturing facilities often involve intricate machinery such as robotics guiding specialized processes. Long schedules and complex buildings come with many risks. Building a new manufacturing facility involves a dizzying set of steps, including programming, site selection, and acquisition, followed by architecture, engineering, and construction team selection. Additional delays can come into play during the design phase with the need for state and local permitting and environmental reviews. But even then, companies can't take a sigh of relief, as it can take even longer to onshore an entire manufacturing network. Manufacturers depend on supply chains involving upstream and downstream materials sourced from other companies, and new procurement of these inputs from localized suppliers can take time. Finding those people that can source, finding those companies in those countries that can source those inputs that are safe, right? That are safe investments for the people that are onshoring, for the businesses that are onshoring, the firms. The next one is onshoring will require quality infrastructure, right? Large-scale advanced manufacturing requires stable electric grids, which we don't have, especially in the South. And that's where many companies would, in the outside of the U.S., would probably be looking. at onshoring. It would be in places like Texas, right? And if you take a look at our ice storms and everything that's happened over the past 5 years, our grid is just complete bullshit. It needs to be restructured, it needs to be rebuilt, it needs to be enhanced. It's horrible, right? And it's taxing, especially during the summer when we have these 115-day, where we have 110, 115 degree weather for days or weeks. And people have these, 4,000 square feet houses that they run the AC at 60 degrees. It's taxing to the grid. So that's definitely something that would have to be explored, updating grids. So large scale advanced manufacturing requires stable electric grids, available water, redundant data and telecommunications network, efficient transportation corridors that can handle increased freight and supply chain volumes. U.S. infrastructure is subpar on all these fronts. Especially when you take a look at data centers. I mean, I think that that's one area that Trump is looking to invest in, which is definitely a positive. Quality labor. This is qualified labor. So this is kind of what we were talking about earlier, the concern that drew my attention to this situation, looking at those videos. That's one of the reasons I laughed at these videos, is because we do have, qualified labor issue in this country if we were to bring many of these manufacturing jobs back to the country. So shifting demographics are also a cause of concern. The U.S. population is aging, birth rates falling. Big issues. Vance covers a lot of the birth rate stuff. They are pro-natalist. Those issues are combining with stricter policies around foreign-born workers to contribute to persistent labor shortage in key industries. At its outset, a reshoring renaissance may spur a surge in construction, a labor-intensive industry that has been slow to leverage technology. And more than a quarter of the U.S. construction labor force is made up of immigrants, a pool that is likely to shrink, but it'll grow back. That won't be a problem. Once factories are built, they will need skilled workers. These employees will command higher salaries than overseas labor. There will also likely be short-term skills gaps for workers experienced in automation, robotics, and data analytics. It is particularly true because when we're thinking about the chip industry that Trump is currently looking at moving from Taiwan over here. I forgot what the company is, but I think that the head of the company is saying they're going to build like 2 plants, I think in Texas or, somewhere in the South. And I think it's going to be Chinese people from Taiwan that are basically going to be working in these factories, right? I don't think it's going to be many Americans, because Americans have to be trained in doing this chip stuff, and that could probably take maybe a year. So, and again, they're going to require higher wages, and they're going to have to figure out how to finance their education. Because the companies aren't going to say, well, here's a voucher for you to go and go to a trade school and learn about this stuff. No, they're going to just import the labor. Hence this push for Trump that Trump has always had to expand the H-1B program at the expense of Native Americans. So there will also be the short-term skills gap. The manufacturing sector's skills and employment gap could result in 1.9 million unfilled positions by 2033. And of course, this is more obvious. Some of the obvious stuff. Ongoing. This is the last one. Onshoring will raise costs. Elevated interest rates and high costs of construction materials will compound the overall cost of onshoring. Retrofitting and rebuilding new manufacturing facilities, along with purchasing equipment, investment in technology, takes substantial capital investment, usually planned years in advance. Material costs run the gamut, from the steel in new buildings frame to critical minerals and electronics and robotics. Stoking uncertainty is a perfect storm of rising prices from new tariffs, stronger export controls, and a changing economic landscape. On top of all that, the cost of property insurance has soared in recent years, of course, given our natural disasters and this kind of thing. Especially if you can say, again, going to Texas, natural disasters, we're no stranger to those things when you think about Texas. And so take what you will from this. As admirable as this is Trump's alleged attempt to bring back in-house manufacturing, reshoring, it'd be a monumental task to accomplish in the duration of his presidency. This is why I felt it may be insulting. It may be, while insulting, the Chinese videos were pretty accurate and pretty hilarious as well. So you can mock the Chinese for their sweatshops, child labor, etc., rightfully so. But Americans like their stuff, and they like it cheap. And many other countries also like stuff. Going back to the tariffs, the stuff China produces at a lower price, so their losses will be made up, even if these at least partly, even if these tariffs uh, Trump has leveled against them remain effective in the long term. And again, like I said earlier, they can consume their own stuff, sell it to other markets through third parties. They, take the money they would otherwise use to subsidize our debt and buy our bonds and these kinds of things, and subsidize our overconsumption and reinvest and continue building their own economies, right? As I said earlier, though, I agree in principle with much of Trump's approach on reinvesting in America, but many of the hard choices we'll need to make and the pain that those choices will cause will need to be slowly introduced onto the American public. I don't know if there's a way to do that. Again, there are experts out there that can talk about that, and you find that easily right now. But you got to prepare the American people, especially if there's even the chance of a short-term recession. And not just say, hey, you're being a panican, or you're being, you got to be strong. You got to just work your way through this. Just forget about it. You can't have that sort of callous approach right now, especially when you won the election promising to lower prices, right? And I'm not too sure right now that his agenda, I'm not at all too certain now that his agenda is truly about the average American's prosperity, right? So it might just be more theater. This might just be about isolating China, right? No matter what the expense is. Okay. Something that's kind of just on the road, one of the many steps on the road to an open conflict over Taiwan or something, right? So, but I want to thank you all for joining. Those are just my thoughts on the tariff regime. Like I said, we probably won't be talking about economics too much on this channel, but when we do, we'll have fun with it. And hopefully you enjoy. Again, like, subscribe, leave a comment, tell me what I can do better. I appreciate it. Thanks.